very hot and sweaty Hove on the south coast of England, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome Norbert Schiller, who, to say that he's a photographer only really tells half the story. And I hope that that his character and all the wonderful, colorful elements of his nature will come out in the next half hour. He's a personal friend of mine, one of my closest friends, in fact, and we've done 4 books together, and it's always a pleasure to work with him. I met him in 2003 at a winery in the Bekaa, and we haven't looked back since. It's been a ride. And Norbert, when I met you, you'd just come back from Iraq, and you'd had a pretty bad tour, I think. And it was at that point when you were recovering from that tour in Iraq that you slowly began to get drawn in from war into wine. And I think maybe that's a good place for us to start. Where did you come from, and where were you heading back in 2003?
I was in Baghdad. It was my second. Well, I had covered 2 previous wars in Iraq: the Iran-Iraq War, and then the 1990-1991 Gulf War. And in 2003, I went in with shortly after the American invasion, and I did that tour, which was quite sane, though it was quite disturbing to see how Iraq got completely destroyed. But the second tour was in the middle, I think it was August. And it was really one of the bloodiest Augusts. That's when they tried to blow up the Jordanian embassy, and that's when they killed who was the head of the United Nations there. I forgot his name. And there was a lot of bombs, a lot of car bombs that were going off. And I remember one incident that really kind of shook me. Every kind of every couple of days, the foreign photographers would get together for my news agency, and we'd draw straws. We'd go out and buy the booze, the beer, and the soda pops for the office. And it was my turn to go. And what I thought was just a normal afternoon run to just a store around the corner, I went over there, and I was carrying 2 cases. I had one of 7-Up, and I had one of, I guess, that Turkish beer. I forgot the name of it. And I was carrying it to the store. And suddenly there was a lot of commotion outside. There was a huge explosion that just completely vaporized the front of the door. And there was a second one. And suddenly I just dropped to my chest with the cases of soda pop and beer underneath me and lay there just quiet. It turned out that an American patrol had gone by. Somebody just threw 2 grenades at it. And it went over the patrol and went into the store. So that was just the routine kind of day-to-day life in Baghdad by August 2003. When I got back to Lebanon after that, I was completely in a kind of a wiped out state, completely, I can't even describe it. And I needed to keep working because that's when I worked for a news agency. And I remember I went to the Bekaa Valley on an assignment. And I can't remember what it was, but it was on my way back from the assignment. I was driving along and I saw all these vineyards. And in these vineyards, I would see these people, a Bedouin, and all these wild colors, reds, yellows, pinks, with scarves on, with funny hats on, and they're all picking grapes. And suddenly I stopped my car. I just ran out there and started taking pictures. And I think they were in a state of shock. By the time I took the pictures and left, I don't think they knew what happened. I got back in the car, continued driving, and saw more Bedouins. And I stopped the car. And by the end of the day, I got back to Beirut, and I filed a photo feature on Wines of Lebanon. Basically, it wasn't really a concrete one. It was just showed that different people picking in these beautiful scenes, these beautiful people. They're Bedouins. At that time, there wasn't really Syrians. They relied on the Bedouin community that really didn't even have a nationality. And that was kind of my real first kind of introduction to something that would lead again to continuing to photograph wine.
So what, but you were moving from wine, sorry, from war to wine. But I remember you told me when we first met once, you had told me that one of the funniest things, one of the most memorable moments that you experienced that really captured the whole absurdity sometimes of the Arab-Israeli conflict involved alcohol. Do you know which story I'm talking about?
That when I was a student
Indeed.
in university.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a student at university, I had a very good friend of mine who was from the UAE, from Abu Dhabi.
But this was in Cairo, right?
No, this was in the States.
Oh, okay. All right.
And he threw a party at his house. He was a grad student. I was an undergrad, but I had been to the Middle East already. I had been to Egypt. So I had this kind of romantic idea about the Middle East. And anyway, he invited me to a party. I went to a liquor store to buy some wine. And as I walked in, I saw this kind of special offer on Israeli wine. I thought, well, that'd be kind of funny. Let me buy a couple bottles of Israeli wine and bring it to my friend from Abu Dhabi at his party. And as I walked in to his party, I handed him these 2 bottles. And, you know, he kind of looked at me, he looked at the bottles, he held them, and I didn't really get it. I thought it was just funny. And suddenly there was a waiter there. He says, "The grapes are grown on Arab soil, we can drink it." And he passed it to the waiter to open the bottles. And I realized later that was really stupid of me, because at that time, there was really an Arab embargo on Israel. Unlike today, where if I were to bring probably a bottle of Israeli wine to a UAE dinner, it would be kind of welcome, you know, good, let's have it. But back then, there was this, you know, when Egypt signed the peace deal, they were the only people the only country in the Arab world that really had peace with Israel. And the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and all North Africa really were boycotting Israel. And I kind of did this as a joke. And that was kind of my introduction into the Israeli-Arab conflict.
So by the time we met, you understood very well the parameters of what was happening in the Middle East and where the Middle East was going and the dynamics and the sensitivities. And what were you feeling when you knew, or was there a moment when you knew that you were being sucked into another world, another dimension that was going to maybe in a way, in no small way, define who you were? I mean, what was the moment when you realized that wine wasn't just a photo essay and that wine was going to be in many ways a way of life and in many ways an expression, because you and I were in Lebanon in the 2006 war, an expression of conflict? What was the moment?
That's tough, Michael. I mean, what was the exact moment when can you rephrase that? Because
okay, sorry. When did you start okay, let me make it simple. When did you realize that wine was going to be a way of life and you were turning your camera on grapes rather than guns?
Well, that was probably a few months after I took that initial those initial pictures to do a kind of a photo feature on wine in Lebanon. I was invited by a friend of mine who worked for the Economist to tour Lebanon because he wanted to do something about wine, and I had told him I did something. And we made a tour of Lebanon to discover all the different wineries. And it was kind of funny because I got to a winery, and there was a group of people there, other journalists, and you were one of them, but you were kind of doing the same thing I was doing. You were accompanying a friend of yours who was doing a story about wine. And it was when we were sitting down kind of at a table together, and everybody was in this intense conversation about wine and what does it mean to make wine in Lebanon and the whole, the dynamics of it. I was just sitting there listening to this and nobody was touching the wine. It was sitting on the table. We were all talking. And I think I interrupted. I said, excuse me, do you mind if we open a bottle of wine? And you kind of looked at me and smiled and said, and then suddenly the conversation changed to the food and to the wine. And I think at that minute, you and I developed a bond that then later on led to a number of books. So I would say that would be kind of the turning point.
Well, I think rather than people saying that you and I should go get a hotel room now, I think that was the moment that I realized that I'd met a kindred spirit. And we went on in the next 14 months after that, very quickly to get a book deal together. And we did our first book, Wines of Lebanon. It was one of the best years of my life, I can tell you, and driving around the country, visiting wineries, learning about their stories, and you capturing the strange panorama of people that we met was indeed a remarkable experience. I want to know, because I don't think you and I have really sat down and discussed this, what were the standout moments of that year? Who are the standout characters? Who are the people that most had an impact on you from the Lebanese wine industry during that year in 2004, when let's not forget, the wine industry was only 10, 11 producers at the time. It's not the 50 it is today, and it was a completely different landscape. What were the real standout memories for you?
The standout memories is basically, I would have to give Ramsey and Sammy Gosson kind of the number one in my mind, because they basically let us camp out on their winery. We basically spent the night in this little kind of ramshackle hut that they had, and we would stick as many people we could get in there. We would spend the night, we'd do our work the next day, we'd come back. And our times there actually I remember quite fondly. I also remember for Château St. Thomas, they had this every year. They had this thing where they would gather their friends for like a vendage, and people would come the night before, and the next morning they would wake up, and go to church. They have a church on their winery. It's fantastic. And the priest would be there, and they would give a blessing to all of us, and then we'd go out and go and harvest. And I was there as a photographer, so I wasn't doing much harvesting. And I'll never forget, there was a picture that comes to mind during that time. It was probably the most memorable picture I took of wine. I have many memorable pictures I've taken of war and conflict, but the most memorable picture was there was this very, very attractive woman from a very, I don't know, Lebanese upper class or middle upper class, and she was very kind of dressed, very kind of shishi, but very kind of earthy. And she was working in cahoots with a peasant, a Bedouin woman who was equally stunningly beautiful and who was also dressed very kind of in her Bedou outfit, lots of reds, a funky hat. And I sat there and I spent the whole time photographing two women together, picking, while everybody else was kind of chatting and gossiping amongst themselves. You had the Bedouin in one corner, and then you had kind of all the vineyard's friends in the other corner picking. They weren't together, only these two were together, and actually they were the most stunning, they were the most beautiful. So I sat there and photographed them, of which I think one or two pictures were in the book. One was a double page of the two working together. I would say that was a standout moment. I mean, really every meeting's the great Serge Horchard, and spending time with him and going up and down in his elevator, and he holds a glass of wine, and he holds it like this, and he goes down the elevator, and you see, taste it when you're at the very bottom. Okay, hold that, wish it around in your mouth. Then he takes the elevator up to the top floor and he says, taste it again. Does it taste different? And I mean, it's incredible because it did. I mean, he was like a genius when it came to wine. And there were some very intimate characters in the wine industry. There was a former pilot who turned wine owner, Captain Karam. And he sat there, he told me when he would fly planes across the world, because he was a captain for MEA, he would sit there and imagine how you could blend different grapes. So that's what he was thinking about when he was flying from Beirut to Abidjan. or from Beirut to Paris. He was thinking about what he was going to do when he got his winery, how he was going to blend the different grapes to get the different wine. And those are just a few, but there were many. But let's stop at those.
Yeah, and I would like to add, now that I notice Jamal is here, one of our regulars, there was also an amazing evening, if you remember, at Masaya, that Jamal was there at a lunch on Independence Day, November 22nd, 2003. And you and I met Jamal for the first time. And he just left the winery after lunch in time before a blizzard blocked the road between the Bekaa and Beirut. And you and I think Nick Blanford, who was here last week in the hot in the hot seat, we got stuck with Ramsey in his winery, and the only thing to do was drink. And I think we nearly drank him out of house and home, didn't we?
It was quite, because basically it was a very early snow that year. I think it was is it November 2nd, if I'm not mistaken, Independence Day. And we woke up that next morning and my car was stuck. The vines were completely covered in snow. And it was very unusual. We had a lovely evening. We drank a lot, we ate a lot, and then the next morning I went out and took some of the most beautiful photos I've ever taken, because to get vines covered with snow is one thing, but to get vines covered with snow, they still had leaves. That was something very special.
Yeah. So moving on, and this is something that I've always wondered about, is you were a news photographer. You took pictures of people shooting at each other, people in demonstrations, you took pictures of world leaders. How did you have to recalibrate your eye, if one can recalibrate an eye, to move from news to wine, which is a very static thing? Wine sits there, it ferments, leaps, but it still lives. What did you have to do to help you shift between the mediums, the two mediums of news and wine, or war and wine?
Actually, it's not that difficult, because if you remember, during the harvest time, the harvest time is almost like a scene on an aircraft carrier. Things have to move in sync. Teams have to get out on the vines and pick the grapes, get the grapes back to the winery, destem them, get them into tanks, and then other teams have to go out and continue where the first teams left on. And remember, you pick early, you kind of take break during the day, you start picking at night. So during the harvest time, actually covering war and covering conflict, they were very complementary. Now, the problem with covering wine or doing a wine book is that suddenly you've got the most boring wine owner in the world who sits there, and you need to feature him in an article or in a book, and he's sitting there and he's holding a glass of wine and he looks like hell. What do you do? This is the problem I've always come across. And sometimes just recently, this is the third time I've gone over to the Bekaa to photograph one particular winemaker, because he has got to be the most boring looking. He's a lovely guy. He's a fantastic person. And this time what I did is I brought along another winemaker, a friend of his who works at another winery, and I got the two of them together, and that's how I was able to kind of capture them for the book, for the upcoming book. I have him now with another winemaker, and they're both sitting inside the winery next to the barrels discussing wine. And the picture is beautiful. It's not static. So many times photographing things that are static, you have to play with it. Nothing's more boring than a wine book that has lots of bottles and lots of labels and just chateaus and wine and perfectly groomed vineyards. You want to photograph your vineyards when they look like hell, because that's part of the process. You want to photograph vineyards in different times of seasons. You want to photograph them in the summer when they're fully, the leaves are big and everything's happening. You want to photograph them in the fall, and then in the winter, sometimes it's the most beautiful because the ground is completely stark and these little bumps popping up along the winery. So it's very different from war, except during harvest, but there is a way to make wine kind of sexy and fun when you're photographing it. You have to play with it. You don't do it sometimes on the first go.
So, and I think I mean, one of the things that I found very refreshing when we were editing pictures for the first book, what you say is very true. There's only so many wine pictures you can take. You got your barrel rooms, you got your fermentation tanks, you've got your vineyards, and maybe a picture of the winery as well. And then you got the winemaker. But if you're trying to illustrate a whole book, you know, these are things that restrict you a bit. And what I found very refreshing about you is that you wanted to throw in pictures that capture a society and a national identity, because you believe, and I agree with you, that wine is that they are an extension of wine, because wine represents a culture. How did you approach, because you and I have just done our second book after a gap of 14 years. How did you mentally prepare yourself for the pictures that you were going to take for this book? And what did you do? What did you say to yourself that said, right, well, I did that first time, but there's now been nearly 15 years in between. I'm going to do things differently. What were the changes?
Well, fortunately, the biggest change was that when we did the first book, there were 14 wineries, and now God knows how many there are. There could be as many as 70. I don't know. I think we featured 40 of the more interesting wineries. And one thing I do, for me, when I do any project, it's not about only my pictures. I'm a history buff, and I love to bring in historical photos. So when a book says photographs by Norbert Schiller, well, I would say maybe 1/10 of those photos are going to be archive photos, things that I pick up, old photos. And the thing that I try to do with the first book and what we did with this book, I bring in the historical element where I add photos which I find in wineries that maybe are of the family's grandparents growing grapes or working in a winery and stuff like that. So it kind of blends the new and the old. I love to bring in things that, for example, and I do it on my website, I take stamps. And every country does stamps. Lebanon has some beautiful stamps, and one of their stamps is of grapes, and I'm going to use that in the new book. It's not my picture, but it's a picture that illustrates that somewhere in Lebanon, there was an appreciation at the post office to include grapes. Now, I don't know if they're wine grapes or they're probably eating grapes, but I do that a lot. I like to bring in kind of a multi-facet. Besides my pictures, I like to bring in old pictures. And for example, sometimes people have better things. I recently, somebody says, listen, I have something that might be interesting to you, and we may use it. I don't know. So I don't limit it to just me, because it's not only about me. It's not about you. It's about, you know, trying to make this a historical document.
Okay. Before we open it to the floor, I want to ask you a little bit about Arak, because Arak is Lebanon's national drink, and you and I did a book about it. What were the differences? What did you, when you're illustrating a book about Arak and you're illustrating a book about wine, what are the differences? Do you have to get yourself in a different frame of mind? Or is it all the same? Is booze just booze at the end of the day? I don't think it is.
Well, booze is booze, but the problem is Arak is much more raw. Arak is a village drink. People didn't make wine in villages except churches. They made sweet wine that was used for ceremonies. But what was made in your village or any village in Lebanon, most villages, was this distilled grape juice and from there you add the aniseed, and it becomes arak. And people who don't know what arak is, it's very close to ouzo, araki, which they have in Iraq and in Turkey, or Pernod, what they have in France. It's basically a grape, grape-based alcohol with added to aniseed. But the problem is it's made with these stills, and these stills can be really fancy like they are at a commercial winery, or they can be something that looks like a kind of out of a speakeasy, kind of moonshine. I mean, I've seen some incredibly primitive stills. I'm actually was frightened to drink the stuff from it because I wasn't sure how clean it was. But I would say that Arak is much raw. You feel much closer to the people when you drink Arak. Wine actually never really took off in Lebanon. It really never took off in the Arab world. If you look at the Arab world in general, the Gulf was always obsessed when they kind of came out of this kind of isolation and came into the 70s. It was whiskey. Whiskey was a national, Scotch whiskey was a national thing right across the Arab world. In Lebanon and Syria, I mean, amongst the elitists in Lebanon, the educated, there was also whiskey. But amongst the populace, the people in the villages, it's always been Arak. And to break in, for wine to break in, it's had a very difficult time. It's had a very difficult time breaking in amongst the educated, amongst the upper classes, because they think, why should we drink Lebanese wine when we can import French wine? And I mean, this has been this battle is trying to say that, well, wait a second, Lebanon is where wine originated from. It came from Lebanon. The grapes originated in Georgia and in the Caucasus. They were fermented. They were developed in the Bekaa Valley and above Batun in the mountains. And from there, they spread around the world. And then suddenly, everybody thinks the French have the answer when they really don't. France, Italy, and Spain put so much additives in the 1970s and 60s before it became fashionable to have kind of pure wine. Lebanon has always had kind of pure wine. It is the most ideal location in the world to grow wine. And that's why it kind of evolved here. So when to try to break wine into the psyche of an average Lebanese, it's very difficult because going back to Arak, they much prefer Arak. I know I got kind of carried away there by bringing in all these things, but I just want to make it clear, kind of to show that wine wasn't really indigenous to Lebanon in modern history. Arak has always been indigenous to Lebanon in modern history. And when wine became fashionable, it was foreign wine that became fashionable. It wasn't Lebanese wine, it was French wine.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you that if you want to get into the soul of the Lebanese, you got to understand Arak more than wine. It is one of the greatest spirits of the world, and indeed one of the first spirits of the world. Norbert, you're heading for the bomb shelter. Imagine it's 2006 again. You're heading for the bomb shelter. What do you take with you? You're not going to be emerging for some time. You need something to keep you sane. What's your poison?
Well, what was my poison? I mean, in 2006, it was very crazy around here. We actually had to evacuate my children on a warship out of here because we didn't know what the situation was going to happen, and we had everything in the house. But if I were to go down to the bomb shelter, I'm stuck for a while, I would bring Arak. Why? Arak can be drunk straight. It can be mixed 2 parts water, 1 part water to 1 part Arak, 2 parts water to 1 part Arak is the way I like it. Most people like it. If you brought down a bottle of wine, you would finish it in 10 minutes. At least a bottle of Arak would last you the evening. And if there's more people in the bomb shelter, you can just dilute it a bit more and more people, because once you taste Arak, the aniseed is so strong, they won't know if they're having 2 parts, 1 part, or 3 parts water to Arak. So hands down, I would take Arak, and for that reason, in our house, in all the houses, wherever you live, I always keep Arak. I don't know if war is going to break out, but Arak is definitely one of the main ingredients.
And I think I would like to add that Arak is also, and I think this is a wonderful excuse to justify its presence, it is medicinal. It is medicinal. The aniseed has a calming effect. And in his book, Syria, a history written in the late 40s, Robin Fedden, writing about Arak, said it is something of a specific, don't you just love that word, something of a specific against the intestinal troubles that plague the traveler in these parts. And you know what? You can take that to the bank as far as I'm concerned. It's a great drink. Guys, I'm going to open it to the floor. Any questions?
So hi Norbert. I decided that I would grace you this week with my presence. Sorry for last week. So what was some of the most surprising things you've seen in documenting Lebanese wine? I think their anecdote about the harvest party at Tuma is really one of those sort of striking ones, and kind of in some ways portrays this strange irony or contradictory nature of Lebanese society in some sort of way. But are there others like that, stories like that? Or things that surprised you, I suppose?
Well, for you, particularly since you were kind of a real wine buff, it's like when I go to a country, I like to drink the wine of the country. When I'm in America, I drink American wine. If I'm in France, I'll drink French wine. If I'm in Turkey, I'll drink Turkish wine. One thing Lebanon has is these very old grapes that have been recently, they've been around, and a lot of them were just kind of looked at and they were used for Arak. Things like Merwa and Obedi. I love the way that at all the wineries now, that these grapes are being reinvented. And not only as blends, they're actually having a single cepage, making wines with just that grape, which is fascinating because I like when things happen indigenously, when things happen on the ground, and they don't always rely on imports. And that's one of the things that kind of fascinate me in this country, because the more I go around, and I'm going around now, for example, Fabrice, who works at Kafreya, he's obsessed about bringing back these vines that he found at I guess you could call it a seed bank or a
nursery. No, the seed bank, yeah.
In Lyon, he's bringing them back, and now he's going to reintroduce grapes which were indigenous to Lebanon, and he's actually creating wines with them. And I tried the first red wine from indigenous grapes. I'm sorry I can't give you the name, but these things, wherever I go and I see that, I find it fascinating that people are actually going beyond the traditional of oaking. One thing that we have to learn about Lebanese wine and Lebanese culture, it's bloody hot here. And you cannot drink an oak bottle of Cabernet in a climate like right now. It's just too hot. I mean, right now I'm having a white, a nice, easy drinking white, because that's what you want to drink, or a young red wine. You don't want wine that's been sitting in oak barrels and they're very heavy and very dry, and you want to drink those when it's cold. And that's what I kind of appreciate about Lebanon, is that they've gone from this kind of quasi-French mentality, and now they're looking towards who they are. They're the Mediterranean culture.
That's, going to Joasa Tuma, he told me, of course they do a single variety Obaide. And he told me that once that he would be going to trade fairs in Vigny Sud in Montpellier or different things, and he was different places, and he would show his wine or in Dusseldorf or whatever. And he said, people, Germans, French, Italians, Americans, they say, well, I want to taste, don't you have any Lebanese grapes? Because he was doing mostly Sauvignon Blanc or Viognier or whatever. And he goes, well, yeah, we have plenty of them. We use them all for Arak.
Yep, that's what they use.
But then he realized, wait a second, this is something to really pursue, and that became it. I mean, as we see the emergence of Merwa, the single variety Mixada's release of it is fantastic, because it puts it front and center in a beautiful package and label and all the rest. And it's exciting to see people really do that. I mean, I think that's a common thing. You find that in Italy as well, where everyone was planting, and Tuscany was planting Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Syrah, and forgetting about the local grapes, because they want to be quote unquote progressive, and that rediscovery, great.
And sometimes being more progressive means using what is indigenous to your land and which is unique to your land and your terroir.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I think that's been a recurring theme throughout the last 2 months, and I think I really hope that the message or some of the things that we're discussing here are not falling on deaf ears, or rather, should I say, are reaching some of the people involved in the Lebanese wine industry, because I know, Jamal, you in particular, and I, and Norbert as well, we feel very, very passionate about this move towards, for want of a better word, authenticity, a move towards an identity, a move away from aping international styles and really creating something very special out of our very small industry.
Norbert, maybe I have a question for you. Good evening.
Yeah.
It struck me when I read Wines of Lebanon that you kind of personifies the relationship with Lebanese wine. Have you ever been tempted to take pictures in other winemaking countries? You mentioned, for example, Israel, or is it?
Well, that's,
you understand my question?
Yeah, I actually have my relation with wine actually goes back to when I was, my friend of my father, an acquaintance of my father had a winery near Saint-Emilion in France. And in the 70s, I spent time there. And it was the first time I actually appreciated wine. And it was the first time I took pictures. That was when I first had my camera and I took pictures of Vendage. It was quite it was an eye-opening experience for me, because up until that time, I was going through my formative years of high school, and before that, wine was just something to get drunk on. And it wasn't until I really worked on that winery and realized that I could drink a lot of that wine, and the next morning I won't wake up with a headache. That was my first introduction to wine in the world. After that, I moved to the Arab world. I spent 20 years in Egypt, and the wine there was just horrific. We lived on beer. That's what we lived on. And when I moved to the Gulf, we lived on whiskey. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like there was this huge gap in my life from the 1970s until 2000, I guess, when we moved from Egypt to here was 2003, that all of us had said, wow, there's wine. I haven't seen wine I haven't seen grapes, I haven't seen vineyards. Because in Egypt, they have vineyards. They have some very old vineyards that go back 100 years, but the wine was just so bastardized. And now, I have to say that they've done a fantastic job. There's Lebanese and a French winemaker who are responsible for both of the big vineyards there. And they're doing a fantastic job with what they have and the budgets they have. But that's what I'm saying. When I left conflict, because really, up until we moved here, I was covering one war from one war to another. As I said, three Iraq wars, Somalia, North Africa, Polisario, you name it, the Palestinian territories. When I was done at the end of the day, we go to the bar and I would have a whiskey. That's what I have. And it wasn't really till I came here and I saw these grapes, and that was that kind of generated my interest in wine again. It generated so much that I found Michael Karam, and then suddenly we became a team. So I really went from nothing to like this full shebang. I mean, most wine photographers, they've been doing this their whole life. I was really naive in wine. I mean, the first time I have like a dozen wine books in my library because I went to a used bookstore. They were cheap, a couple dollars to see what they did. I got so bored of seeing bottles, as I said when I started, bottles, chateaus, and vineyards. There was no life. And what I did for Wines of Lebanon, what I'm doing in this book, is I'm trying to give it a kind of a photojournalistic feel to it, where it's dirty a little bit. It's not so sterile. I hate sterile books, and I hate sterile wine books.
Thanks.
Sterile wine too, I hope. I take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Norbert, I have a question for you. Going back to Arak, is this summer going to be? Is there a new Arak that's the flavor of summer for 2020 in Lebanon, or is there always just the one go-to brand that you go pick?
Well, you know, there's two kind of ways of thinking about Arak. Everybody says, "Oh, the Arak of my village is the best. The Arak of my village is the best." I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't drink village Arak because I see the way it's made. I drink from the big. I mean, like I drink the Coca-Cola of Arak. I really drink the best Arak because Arak is very temperamental, and if you do it wrong, you can really screw it up, but it can really screw up your head. I drink. I'm going to sit there and kind of give a brand right now because I don't want to, be biased. But I drink all the major Araks from the major wine producers. I stay away from village Arak. I know in Michael's village of Zabuha, every in that village makes Arak, and I've tried probably 90% of that Arak in that village, and I can tell you that many times I've come off that mountain with my head not 100%. So I am a strong believer, because of the content of alcohol, you better be careful what Arak you drink. So is there a brand that's this summer?
Yeah, Michael, would you agree to that?
Michael.
He's
Well,
staying quiet.
I'm going to take the fifth on this one, I think. But I think there's a difference between the
You have a Bill of Rights in England? I didn't know that.
village Arak, Baladi Arak, and the commercial Arak. They're very different. One's probably a little bit more. Let's say some of them vary in quality and strength a lot more. So I can see where Norbert's coming from, but let's not forget that even the commercial Arak is 54, 55% ABV. I mean, it's not a spirit to be trifled with.
That's why I drink commercial Arak.
Norbert, some quick questions. I got some quick fire questions for you, okay? Don't think too much. Your favorite Lebanese wine?
I have many favorites. Blanc de Blanc, Ksara, that's just kind of like a kind of, what would I say? It's kind of like if I'm homesick. But I can't say it's my favorite. It's just something that comes to my mind right now.
Favorite grape?
Jesus Christ, Sauvignon Blanc, but I like the Obedi, I like the Merwa. So I'm an indigenous person, so I'm going to go with the Merwa.
What's been your most memorable lunch in the last year, and why?
My most memorable lunch in the last year, and why? Give me a hint.
Where do you like going for lunch in Beirut, and why? Okay, let's change the question.
Le Chef. Why? Because it's old, established. We're treated like kings there. They know our order before we even walk in. I love that when somebody knows your order before you even, as soon as they see you at the door, the table's been set.
And what do you have? What do you drink when you go to Le Chef, which for people who don't know it, is a very, very small family-run, very old restaurant in Gemese. It's not the grill room at the Grosvenor House by any stretch. It's a very basic Lebanese restaurant. What do you drink when you go there?
I usually have the plat du jour because I don't like menus. In fact, I can't stand menus. I like just whatever is fresh. And I have a Arak Brun.
Okay. Most eccentric person in the Lebanese wine industry?
Alive or dead?
Alive.
most eccentric person in the Lebanese wine. Well, there's Mahar, Mahar from Set. There is Elias Malouf from who has a little tiny winery called Rayak. He's incredibly eccentric. I mean, there's many. I think anybody who makes wine in Lebanon has got to be eccentric because you're going against such odds. Can I just tell one story? Yesterday, brings back war and wine very nicely, because yesterday I was in the Bekaa Valley. I was shooting at a winery called La Torba. It's one of the few wineries in the sense which you can actually call a chateau if you're in France, because it's really big and all their vines are around the chateau, the winery. They don't import it from anywhere. And on my way back, it was quite late, it was getting late. I came, when you go from the Bekaa to Beirut, you have to go over the Lebanon Mountain. You go up about 1,000 meters. And halfway up, the road was blocked and the army was sitting there. And I thought, oh my God, 2 trucks hit head on. But they diverted us around some side roads. We were able to get back onto the highway. As I was coming over the top of the mountain, on the way back down towards the village of Bamdoun, I saw all this fire, and I thought, again, I was very naive. I kind of think that the revolution here is over. I saw all this fire, and I thought, my God, it's an accident. And it turned out the army had just moved in. They were blocking the roads with burning couches of all that. I don't know where they got all these couches, and there was fire everywhere. And instead of trying to back up and go around, I followed the army, the truck, right through the fire to get to the other side. So that's kind of what people in the wine industry have to go with. So they're all a bit eccentric because of that, because you never know whether you're going to survive. I mean, the big thing now is trying to import because the inflation has gone out of control. There's no dollars on the market, so wineries are having a hell of a time importing stuff. And actually, my friend at SEP, because he makes so few bottles of wine, he's asking people to bring back their bottles and he'll pay you for it because they can't import stuff because they have no foreign currency. So being eccentric as a winemaker is kind of one and the same.
Norbert, what was the name of the other winery that you mentioned?
SEP.
And the other one?
La Torba.
La Torba. Thank you.
It's a newer one. It's quite big. It's gonna probably show its face as time goes on because they have a lot of land and the capacity. They're the only one, in fact, in this country that's making sparkling wine, and it's very good. That's what I was tasting yesterday.
Anyone else from the floor? Norbert, we want to thank you for taking time to be with us tonight. I know for a fact, and I know they won't mind me telling this, that you're going to go from your office now in your apartment and go and pour yourself a very large whiskey, because I know that deep down you are a whiskey man. I think you've earned it this evening. Very entertaining as usual. I can't wait to team up with you again. And all we can say is stay safe. Thank you very much. Mark?
Thank you, Norbert. Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure as always. Look forward to next week, and thank you for all the regulars. It's been really great to see you again. And we'll see you next time.